And we are at 3, 2, 1. San Francisco, open your golden gates, open your gates and let me in. What are you doing?
Let me guess. We're doing Alien Nation.
Alien Nation. Bum, bum,
It's
bum.
su- it's surprisingly not about bad aliens, but about aliens who just want to live and have a nice day.
Yes, yes, it is. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a Just Nerdery episode. This is Just Nerdery episode number 7. Um, we should be back either next week or the week after with a regular Nerdery and Murdery. But again, we would like to thank K3 for joining us again. Yay!
Yay, the internery!
For this Just Nerdery episode. And as you may have heard in the opening stab, we are talking about Alien Nation today. Alien Nation, for those uninitiated, is an American science fiction media franchise created by Rodney S. O'Banion, who was later known for Farscape. It compromises film, television, and other media productions about alien refugees living on Earth. The series uh, started out as a 1988 film called Alien Nation, which was adapted into a Fox network television series of the same name in 1989. Fox canceled the series abruptly after one season because of money issues, not because of ratings. But it continued the story in 5 TV movies. So Alien Nation was actually on all through the 90s. Um, the series also produced other media franchise tie-ins, including novels and comic books. But aside from the sci-fi angle, the franchise fits into many different genres, including drama, police procedurals, and buddy cop uh, movies.
I'd also argue with some episodes focusing more on like the other kids' coming of age stories too.
Yes, yes. Um, the series way more so than the film. So I'll give a little background on the idea. So it is set in the near future in the United States. So the film opens. Um, the film was released in 1988, but most of the action of the film takes place in 1991, which was the future at the time. So basically, in the early months of 1988, a flying saucer hovers over the Mojave Desert and basically crash lands. And it's city size. It's gigantic. Um, it didn't really crash per se, as it sort of landed roughly, um, and the whole world stopped and turned its attention to the Mojave Desert. Well, we sent some people out to talk to the people on the ship, right? And when they opened up the ship and walked out, and we started talking to them, we realized that they were slaves. They were enslaved race, genetically modified to be workers, um, in all levels of society. Yeah, basically, they had a caste system, and they had taken over the ship to escape slavery, and went to the first planet they could find that was habitable, and they were going to land and try to make peace with the people who were there, and and find a new homeland. But they couldn't. Once they got the ship on the ground, they couldn't get it back off. So they go into quarantine to make sure that they don't give us any bugs and we don't give them any bugs. Um,
Which fair, I get that.
yeah, and they're in quarantine for about a year, year and a half, and then after quarantine, they basically get housed because it's in the Mojave Desert. The closest big major metropolitan area is L.A., so they go to this area in L.A., South Central, which is later referred to as Slag Town, and they basically live inside this. area of LA for the next year and a half. Well, they start to move out into different parts of LA because they've decided that they can't go home, right?
Yeah,
Um,
obviously.
yeah, they can't go home. So they have to stay here. The film takes place again in late 1991, 3 years after the ship has landed. Um, Officer Sykes or Detective Sykes and his partner Tug, Jim Tuggle, are are working Slagtown, and Jim Tuggle gets shot by what appears to be a monstrous uh, alien. Slag is a derogatory term for them. It's a it's not a
Yay, spaceism,
yeah
space racism.
yeah. Kind of ends racism on the Earth because we got somebody else to hate on. So there was an upside, I guess. Any,
I just,
any yeah, they don't mind. Honestly, they don't even really mind being called slags because they think it's dumb. They're really really smart. They're spacefaring people. They're actually you know 1,000 years ahead of us technologically. But again, they were a slave race, so they weren't the ship builders. They just ran the ship. You know, in some cases, they dealt with all levels of operating the ship, maintenance, um, hydroponics, all this other stuff. But they didn't build the ship, so they can't really repair it, if that makes sense. Plus, they also did research. Um, the name for them is called the Tanktonese. You don't really get that in the film. The film is much more of a buddy cop movie, but and the film did okay. It's pretty good. The film starred James Caan and uh, and Mandy Patinkin, who had just come off of The Princess Bride. Um, Mandy Patinkin, when they first filmed it, the character's name was George Jetson. So they filmed a lot of it where his name was George Jetson, but they thought it was stupid, so they changed his name to Sam Francisco. So they had to
it's
go.
still equally as stupid.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that was the idea because there's 250,000 of them. So when they got off, they gave them regular names, because they had to get IDs and everything else because they basically became citizens. Um, so they started John Smith, Beverly Doe. When they got to 100,000, they were like, I don't know, Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling is one of the people there. So Sam's name is not, um, or well, he goes by George. George's name is not. It's so and Sai is his name, but it's really hard to pronounce. So he goes by George Francisco or Sam Francisco. But Sykes in the film is like, you know what, San Francisco, I can't call you that. I'm gonna call you George instead. Is that okay? And he's like, yeah, my name is so and sa. I don't. George means nothing to me. He's like, it's funny though because Sykes' name sounds a lot like Sykes, which in Tinctonese is short for cranium and excrement. So in the movie,
Shithead.
he will walk into a Tinctonese place and introduce himself as Sykes, and they'll start laughing.
His name is Shithead.
Yeah. Um, uh, they're at a crime lab. Francisco detects an abnormality on the body of one of the newcomers in the film. Uh, and Sykes and Francisco go to a nightclub to question newcomer Joshua Strader, but Strader is murdered by a criminal ring led by newcomer businessman William Harcourt and his henchman Rudyard Kipling. While investigating, the men do find themselves becoming friendlier with each other. Sam informs Sykes as part of a newcomer body to strike for maximum pain, which Sykes uses later on. So he tries to kick one in the groin, and it does nothing. And George is like, "Don't hit him there. Hit him here, here, and here, and he'll go down." Um, The newcomers do not get intoxicated by alcohol. They get intoxicated by sour milk.
Which, when you think about it, is just a different form of alcohol in another process
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
it, you know, our alcohol is rotten fruit and stuff like that,
yeah.
and rotten
Basically,
wheat.
theirs is rotten milk.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But it also, if they get drunk a lot, they stink because they smell like sour milk.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, also when we get drunk, we stink too.
Um, so there were 25 stories uh, that 20th Century Fox received every week in 1988. The original screenplay for Alien Nation was submitted as a spec script, and Gail Ann Hurd, who now runs Disney uh, or Star Wars for Disney, she came across this one. She's like, "Oh, this is really good. This is a real page turner." She's like, "It's a buddy cop movie." But what she found interesting about the film story was the whole approach of the immigrant settling on our planet. So it really kind of turned it on its ear. But for the most part, the movie was set up to be a buddy cop movie. So when they decided to start doing the series, um, there was one scene that the guy who was making the film um, noticed. Um, he was like, there's a scene where George is kissing his wife goodbye in this little house on the edge of Slagtown, um, and saying goodbye to his kids and picking them up. And the as he was watching this, he was thinking, "That's it. That's the story we need to tell in the TV series. It's not the buddy cop movie genre, which is fine. We can add elements of that, but the real story there is the immigrant story, and how this guy really is a fish out of water. For all intents and purposes, George
Well,
is the hero.
he can't go in the water though, to be fair.
Yes. Okay. So that's another thing about the aliens' physiology. So what we're led to believe is that they were genetically engineered. It turns out that that's not actually true. They were genetically modified. They evolved on a planet, Tankton, which you don't find out till later on in the series. But what we're led to believe is that in one of the ways that they kept control over them was basically make them, I don't want to say allergic. It's seawater. Seawater acts as a solvent to these creatures or to these people. Um, so they're afraid of the ocean, but they settled in Los Angeles, which is on the ocean. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
really,
it's like if mom went to Japan, even though she's allergic to fish.
oh yeah,
And
yeah. She couldn't eat anything except rice. Um, so yeah, you find out in the series as the series goes along that they weren't genetically engineered; they were genetically modified. That they come from this place called Tankton, and the whole time we're led to believe that the overseers that controlled them were another alien race. Turns out that's not true. They never come out and overtly say it in the series, but I think they were eventually going to. They were enslaved by their own people. Yeah, it's really really rough for what is essentially just a silly little science fiction show, but there's a lot going on in there. Um, a lot of ideas that they played with, like Star Trek or Planet of the Apes. Um, Heard in the original film contacted cinematographer Adam Greenberg to work on the production. Um, and he was vacationing in the Dead Sea, uh, and he was not expecting it. It's sort of a throwback to other similar genres like Planet of the Apes or Silent Running. The newcomers are relegated as second class citizens. So they really, really wanted to play that up. So, but they had to do so many of them. So what they figured out was if we give them hair, it's going to be terrible, because we got to have hundreds of these people made up. So if we make them relatively hairless, it's going to be easier. But we also don't want them to look like they were made in a factory. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
like
what they,
how they made Ferengi headpieces every time they did one. They didn't make it look like the same guy, you know?
exactly, exactly. But instead of dealing with a dozen people, they're dealing with hundreds. So they gave them these spots which look like hair, and every spot pattern was different, which could be applied rather quickly. They could be painting, especially the background people. They just slap some brown on them. It didn't have to be great because they were, kind of far at the background. Um, and then in the series, they kind of got into their physiology, and some head patterns are different from others because because they are binom. So in the series, and again, you find this out in the series, they kind of explore this idea more. There are three sexes for the Titanese, slags, aliens, whatever you want to call them. Um, there's male, there's female, and there's the binom. The binom um, basically lays with the female and provides a catalyzing agent, and then the female gets with the male, um, develops the embryo, and then passes the embryo back to the male like a seahorse, and the male actually carries
So
the
it goes,
yeah.
women holds the baby for a bit, Phenom takes the baby,
No,
puts
there
it
is yeah, there's
inside
no
the
there is no
male.
baby before the binom.
Ah,
Yeah, the binom provides a catalyzing agent. I don't think there's any genetic material. They talk about it very intently in one of the films. The binom provides a catalyzing agent. The male then lays with the female and impregnates the female. The female carries the baby for a little while, like a marsupial, and then the female puts the embryo into the male in like a pouch, and so the male
ah.
finishes off carrying the baby because they wanted them to be alien, and they thought, well, that's the most alien thing we can do: make them three sexes and make the male carry the baby like a seahorse. Um, so they in the series, which was released about a year and a half after the film, 89 to 90 season, they replaced the actors because they couldn't get James Caan and Mandy Patinkin. So they got Gary Graham to play Detective Sykes, who is Soval in Enterprise. Um, and the character playing George is Eric Pierpoint, who was really big in. He shows up a bunch of Deep Space Nine. He shows up a bunch in Babylon 5. He.
This is a guy who's either used to being around people in makeup or
Uh-huh.
being in makeup himself.
Yeah. You had Kathy Frankel, who was played by Terry Trias, who was also an alien, and Michelle Scarabello, who played, or I'm sorry, Michelle Scarabelli, who played Susan, uh, George's wife, and his son Buck, played by Sean Six, and their daughter Emily, played by Lauren Woodland. Um, and then they give birth to Vanessa. There's never really a baby for Vanessa. Vanessa is usually a puppet, but you don't really see Vanessa until the movies anyway. Um, and Sean Six, who plays Buck, in the opening of the series, he's kind of a radical, um, like a like a like a skinhead punk on the streets in England in the late 70s, early 1980s.
So a guy you want to beat the shit out of.
He eventually joins the police force and becomes a cop, mostly because of Vanessa, because the male carries the young child at the last. Males are the caregivers for the Tinctonese children when they're young, right? So um, Sean Six, because he's or Buck, because he's a teenage boy and is going through basically puberty, has a desire to care for the young baby and does. Um, because that's the way their biology works, that's the way their society works. And it softens him a lot. So you get this great story arc with Buck. You get this great story arc with Susan, because she starts out as being very deferential, and she just wants to get along and make sure everybody's good. Well, she gets a little radicalized, because she sees how her children are being treated. Because Buck is basically running with a gang, because when he goes to high school, he gets nothing but crap from the human kids. So he hangs out with a group of um, newcomers. Um, it's just, the series is just so good, and again, you only got 20 27 episodes, I think. Um, and it was one of the few successful series for Fox, but the network suffered from financial shortages, uh, caused by, well, they miscalculated their advertising income. So they canceled all of their dramatic series for 1990 to the 1991 season, with the exception of 21 Jump Street. That was the only dramatic series they kept. But they ended the season on a cliffhanger. Everybody was really, really, um, really, really clamoring for the rest of it. And they, they they had this one called Dark Horizons that they made into a comic book and some novels. So in 1994, Fox was like, "Well, everybody loves this, and they're kind of mad at us for canceling it." Um, so they brought it back, and they released it in October 25th, 1994. They recorded it in late 1993. So they were really only off the air for about 2.5, 3 years. And every year they would release a movie. Matter of fact, in '96 they released two. There were five altogether. Um, and of course you had these story arcs that were going along. Plus you had the background of what happened to them before. And this is when you find out, and again, it's not overtly said, but it's heavily implied that they weren't enslaved by an alien race. They weren't genetically engineered. They evolved and had a society, and a spacefaring society, on their home planet. And at some point, some despot on their home planet enslaved most of the population. None of the people that you see in the series know what Tincton looks like. They were all born in space, because it's been going on for hundreds of years. The first film, called Body and Soul, was written by Andrew Schneider and David Froloff. Renee and Harry Longstreet, who had also done the novelization. It follows the television series with two parallel storylines. The first plot is about a seemingly human Tinctonese hybrid child involved in a sinister experiment with a newcomer. Scientists disguised as humans as some. Okay, we're going to have an edit there. So it follows a television series formatted by two parallel storylines. The first plot is about a seemingly human Tinctonese hybrid child involved in a sinister experiment with a newcomer, scientist disguised as a human. The subplot is a budding relationship between Matt Sykes and his Tinctonese neighbor, Kathy Frankel. The relationship between Matt and Kathy was an ongoing theme in the Alien Nation television series. So Matt Sykes and Kathy Frankel basically end up falling in love. The second film Oh, I'm sorry. Dark Horizons came out in 1994. Body and Soul is the second film. Dark Horizons is basically an ending of the cliffhanger. Uh, there was a viral infection that was created by a group of human purists to exterminate the newcomers. And there's also a subplot of Alfonso, a Tinctonese overseer who lands on Earth to find any surviving Tinctonese and bring them back to slavery. So yeah, the Tinctonese fleet sends an overseer out to come and find them. This is going on, and he ends up not going back because he's like, why would I want to enslave? Why would I want to be a slave anymore when I can live here and be free? Um, and so you got the body and soul, which is they're trying to kill, um, basically with a plague. They're trying to kill the newcomers because the newcomers are, for the most part, because of their physiology, they're stronger than us, they're smarter than us. Of course, they can't go near the ocean, but they can survive in lower oxygen atmosphere places because they don't need as much oxygen as we do. They're also immune to any of the bugs that are on Earth. They really don't get sick. They can have allergies and stuff like that, but they really don't get sick. Well, they develop this pathogen to attack them. And of course, they stop it. The next one is Millennium, which was released in January of 1996. Millennium follows human detective Matt Sykes and George Francisco as they investigate a mind-altering Tinctonese artifact being used to lure followers into a deadly cult. The artifact used in the film is the same one from the Alien Nation episode Generation to Generation, which I believe I've included in our YouTube playlist. I've included a lot of the episodes as well as some of the scenes from the movie, as well as I think I've got a full movie there. And the last one is, or I'm sorry, the next one is Alien Nation: The Enemy Within. It was released in November 12th of 1996. And it's about a group of Tinctonese called the Aeneos, and a subplot involving the Tinctonese Benom Albert Einstein. Because again, they were running out of names, so they just named him.
Albert.
Yeah, Albert. Albert is the Benom that helped conceive Vanessa.
Aw.
Yeah, and Albert wants to have a child with his girlfriend, or actually wife, and he needs George's help because he cannot create Tinctonese sperm. Whatever. I don't think they actually call it that. They call it something else. But he can't create it because he's a Benom. He only provides the catalyzing agent. So they want George to help them. And so, that's going on, as well as the Aeneos. Now, what's weird about The Enemy Within is, George has been this very anti-racism, anti-stratified society of the former newcomers, because they have the caste society, and it's real hard for those people to break out of that. But when it comes to dealing with the Aeneos, George treats them like they're garbage. They're basically the untouchable class. George says they're a different species from us. They're not. They're just a lower class of the same species.
Almost reminds me of what we do to what we did to other races. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
it's marginalized, but it's wrong. And George again eventually sees the error of his ways. And finally, you've got the Udara legacy, which it revolves around. There was a resistance movement on the ship called the Udara, but they got caught and were implanted with hypnotic suggestions to act as sleeper agents. And it turns out that Susan is one of them. She knew she was part of the Udara because the Udara are the ones that eventually took over the ship and crash landed it here. But she thought that she got out of it years ago. She did not realize she was a sleeper agent. So yeah, she gets kind of crazy and you know nearly kills George because George was one of the Tanktonese who helped crash the ship, or not crash land. But that is basically it for Alien Nation. I know that's a lot of information. I had a bunch of more notes about the production and things like that, but I really wanted to give an overview of the story itself. It's beautiful. Um, it's very Star Trekky. It's one of those things. I really love it. What do you think about it?
I think it's pretty all right. A lot of the conception ideas is based a lot more instead of being in a starship out space with them, is that they've come here because they needed our help. And I think that's interesting to.
Yeah, and well, they talk a lot about that. It's like, what amazes us about you is that you guys have these high and mighty ideals, but it's really hard for you guys to live up to them. And I think George comes to realize that's kind of the point. We set a goal for ourselves that eventually we want to obtain. So it explores those ideas a lot, plus the ideas of differences, and even inside of differences, we can be the same. They were going to produce another movie where Sykes and Kathy end up having a baby together, a hybrid, which every scientist on Earth, including some newcomer scientists, are like, yeah, that can't happen. Our physiology is entirely too different. Because we have three sexes, because the male has to carry the child toward the end, it won't work that way. But there was a story being floated around that, and I think they ended up putting it in a novel and a comic book, that Kathy Frankel and Sykes have a kid together. Um, but yeah, and the characters of Susan and Kathy Frankel and Buck, um, I think are probably the best parts of the series itself. Not even so much Eric Pierpoint and Sykes. I can't remember. Gary Graham. Which they did a good job. I'm not saying that they didn't, but Terry Trias and Michelle Scarbielli, incredible. Full stop. Uh, just amazing. But yeah, that's about it for Alien Nation. Other than get out and see it, we've got it on our YouTube playlist. It is available on Tubi right now. All of it. I think the movie is available on Amazon Prime for free too. You should really see the one. James Caan and Mandy Patinkin really tear it up. Um, but again, the emphasis is more on the buddy cop movie in the film than on the newcomers integrating into society. Whereas the television series is all about integration and the bad things that happen to them that they don't want to talk about. But yeah, that's about it. Again, thank you for joining me with this one. I think we may only have to do one more and we'll be up, maybe two. Or this could be our last one for the Just Nerdery, at least for a little while. We'll see where Jeffrey is for the murdery part, and we'll get that up and running. I really appreciate all of our, again, K3 for helping us out. All of our Patreons who have been really, really helpful in keeping the show up and running through our hiatus. We appreciate all the listeners out there who are listening. If you want to go out and get some merch, we've got merch on our website. If you want a t-shirt that says Nerdery and Murdery, we've even got one that says Cue the Music. Little plug for my t-shirt. There's also one that says You're an Idiot, but that's something that Jeffrey does. And with that, I have been Zig with your Nerdery.
And I've been Kim with your Internery.
Cue the music.